They say money can't buy happiness, but can it buy development? Or better yet, can it build a nation? Today, we unpack the billion-dollar question. Is foreign aid a helping hand or a hidden hand? International aid, or foreign aid, is financial, technical, or material assistance provided by one country or institution to another, often in support of development, humanitarian efforts, or crisis response. It can be bilateral from one country to another, or multilateral, channeled through international organizations like the UN, World Bank, or regional development banks. While often framed as an act of generosity, foreign aid is a deeply strategic and sometimes controversial tool. It raises critical questions about impact, dependency, and sovereignty. Here's what's on the table today, so grab your mental passports, because we're going global. We will debate over the efficacy of foreign aid. We will ask the awkward questions like, which countries should receive foreign aid? And how is it coordinated? And the all too obvious gems of aid conditionality. And lastly, foreign aid and institutional reform. Stick with us, because by the end of this episode, you'll be ready to talk foreign aid like a pro. And hey, if nothing else, at least you'll be the most interesting person at your next dinner party. Now, here's a question. Should developed countries provide foreign aid to developing nations? Foreign aid remains a highly debated topic, with arguments both in favor and against its effectiveness. While aid is often framed as a tool for humanitarian relief and economic development, its underlying motivations and outcomes vary significantly. What is the rationale behind foreign aid donations anyway? 1. Geopolitical interests. Developed countries often provide aid to strengthen diplomatic ties, influence political alliances, and secure strategic advantages. For instance, aid may be used to support friendly governments or prevent instability in regions critical to global security. 2. Economic and trade considerations. Some donor countries view aid as an investment in future trade partnerships. Aid can facilitate market expansion and ensure developing nations purchase goods and services from the donor economy. Tied aid. 3. Guilt and reparations for colonial exploitation. Some argue that aid serves as a form of compensation for historical injustices, particularly colonial exploitation. The idea is that developed nations have an ethical obligation to assist countries that suffered under colonial rule. 4. Altruistic goals, poverty alleviation. Many aid initiatives stem from genuine humanitarian concerns seeking to reduce poverty, improve healthcare, and support education. Organizations such as UNICEF and the World Food Program focus on delivering essential aid without economic or political conditions. So, what are the debates over the efficacy of foreign aid? 1. Historical success and limitations. Post-war aid, Marshall Plan, the U.S. provided extensive financial assistance to rebuild war-torn European economies. Countries like Germany and Japan experienced rapid economic growth due to aid. However, these nations already had strong institutional frameworks, educated workforces, and developed infrastructure, making them better positioned to utilize aid effectively, conditions that many developing nations lack. 2. Motivational distortions in aid distribution. Aid allocation has historically been influenced by political biases. Many donors prefer to assist former colonies, maintaining historical ties. During the Cold War, aid distribution often depended on a country's alignment with communist or capitalist ideologies rather than its development needs. 3. Economic strategy, tied aid. Some countries provide tied aid, requiring recipients to purchase goods and services from the donor nation. This limits the effectiveness of aid by reducing the recipient's ability to choose the most cost-efficient development solutions. 4. Controversies on long-term impact. Critics argue that foreign aid has done little to foster sustained economic growth in many developing nations. Others emphasize the positive impact of technology and knowledge transfer, as aid has contributed to infrastructure development, agricultural advancements, and health sector improvements. While foreign aid can provide essential humanitarian relief, its long-term effectiveness in driving economic growth remains contested. The real challenge lies in ensuring aid is structured to empower local institutions, encourage self-sufficiency, and avoid dependency cycles. Controversies in foreign aid policy. The debate over foreign aid remains deeply contested, with economists and scholars presenting conflicting views on its effectiveness in promoting sustainable development. Sachs advocates for a much more expansive foreign aid policy, arguing that limited aid has failed not because of its ineffectiveness, but because it has been insufficient in scale. He believes that massive financial assistance, particularly for health, infrastructure, and education, could lift developing nations out of poverty. His approach, however, has been criticized for underestimating institutional challenges within recipient countries, including corruption and governance inefficiencies. Easterly argues that traditional foreign aid has failed to improve the well-being of citizens in developing countries beyond providing short-term humanitarian relief. He calls for a reorientation of aid strategies, shifting from large-scale aid programs to smaller, incremental development initiatives, such as community-driven projects. His skepticism stems from concerns that top-down aid often lacks accountability, leading to wasted resources and dependency rather than sustainable development. Moyo presents a more critical stance, arguing that foreign aid has undermined development by funding corrupt regimes, thereby worsening repressive and authoritarian governments in developing countries. Her book, Dead Aid, contends that long-term aid fosters dependency, discourages self-sufficiency, and enables political elites to maintain power without democratic accountability. She advocates for market-driven development instead of aid-based approaches, emphasizing trade, investment, and entrepreneurship as more sustainable solutions. Key debate question. The central question in this debate remains: can institutions in developing countries be strengthened to ensure that large-scale aid is effectively utilized, or does aid inherently foster dependency and political instability? Which countries should receive foreign aid? If one takes a view that choosing should be predicated on reasonable assurance that the foreign aid will be effective, a 1. World Bank study showed that foreign aid works best in a country with good policy and institutional environment. Dilemma: developing countries with good policy and institutional environment will often not have pressing claims for foreign aid. Moises 9 notes: the paradox is that any country capable of meeting such a stringent requirement is already a developed country. 2. Paul Collier: 60 or so developing countries with the poorest billion citizens suffering from various traps should be given aid. The natural resource trap, civil conflict trap, etc., but these countries are precisionally where there is no good policy or institutional environment. Efficacy is not guaranteed. Coordination of aid. Personnel and budgets organized in subject area groups and geographical groupings. Pritchett argues that foreign aid dispensers experience strong incentives to give money quickly whole, resisting both independent evaluations of outcomes and acknowledgments of failure. Within recipient gobs there a parallel set of issues, tensions between different ministries competing for funds, compounded by donor proliferation where many donor agencies in the same subject area are active in the same area, each trying to be as visible as possible. They are often unaware of the other. Receiving from multiple sources burdens the receiver with high transaction and managerial cost in complying with each donor as reporting and accountability requirements. Aid conditionality. To try mitigating against conflicting interest of donors and the receiving countries, the use of conditionality in the terms on which the aid is provided. Some are perverse. Donors as GOPs to commit to purchasing goods and services in donor states. This freezes out local suppliers. Conditionality reflects what the donor states believes should be high priority for developing countries as opposed to the views of government or population. Yes, aid conditionalities refer to the requirements that donor countries, international financial institutions, or development agencies impose on recipients in exchange for financial assistance. These conditionalities can be categorized into different types.
1.
Economic conditionalities. Structural adjustment conditions. Recipients must implement economic reforms such as privatization, trade liberalization, or deregulation, e.g., IMF and World Bank structural adjustment programs. Fiscal policy conditions. Governments are required to reduce budget deficits, cut public spending, or increase tax collection to stabilize their economies.
2.
Political conditionalities. Democratic reforms. Aid may be tied to requirements for electoral transparency, democratic governance, and protection of civil liberties. Human rights protections. Some donors demand improvements in human rights policies before providing aid, e.g., withholding aid from countries with poor human rights records.
3.
Social conditionalities. Healthcare and education spending. Some aid requires governments to invest in healthcare, education, and social welfare programs to improve quality of life. Anti-corruption measures. Donors may insist on stronger anti-corruption frameworks and transparency in financial management.
4.
Environmental conditionalities. Climate change commitments. Aid might be contingent on implementing environmental policies, such as carbon reduction strategies or sustainable development initiatives. Sustainable resource management. Some assistance requires better policies on land use, water conservation, or deforestation prevention.
5.
Military and security conditionalities. Conflict resolution conditions. Aid may be granted only if a country commits to peace efforts, conflict de-escalation, or demilitarization. Defense spending limits. Some donor countries restrict aid usage for military expenditures to ensure funds support development rather than security operations. In many countries, conditionality is violated or imperfectly followed by GOPs, leaving donors to continue to give funds to meet expenditure commitments. Some aid might seem unconditional, but it is crucial to be prospective in those cases. It might not be what it seems. Conditionalities may be instrument-based or result-based conditionalities. Instrument-based conditionality occurs when the disbursement or commitment of aid or the benefit granted to the recipient is conditional on the adoption of public policy measures, macroeconomic measures, for example. Results or performance-based conditionality is used when aid payments or benefits granted to the beneficiary are conditional on the achievement of results defined jointly and upstream between the donor and the beneficiary. Based on the institution. Each institution applies its own conditions to the benefits it grants. Take, for example, the IMF. The World Bank and the EU institutions may impose their own different conditions, based on the recipient country. In addition to the level of confidence that donors have in the recipient country, notably its capacity to face its current and future challenges, conditionality is also linked to its economic and political weight. Aid granted to a small, vulnerable country with poor governance is generally not subject to the same conditionality as aid to a large middle-income country with more mature governance. Foreign aid and institutional reform. The debate between Jeffrey Sachs and William Easterly presents contrasting perspectives on the effectiveness of foreign aid in fostering development. Sachs is a proponent of large-scale aid expansion, arguing that substantial financial assistance can help lift developing countries out of poverty. However, his approach is often criticized for overlooking institutional weaknesses, particularly the governance structures that determine how aid is utilized. Conversely, Easterly focuses on institutional challenges, arguing that large-scale aid is ineffective unless institutions are capable of managing it responsibly. He advocates for a bottom-up approach, where aid is directed towards small, incremental initiatives, such as drilling wells in local communities, to provide tangible benefits without overwhelming fragile governance systems. Despite their differing views, both Sachs and Easterly failed to comprehensively address whether institutional limitations can be systematically resolved to ensure that large-scale aid can be deployed with confidence in its efficacy. A promising alternative perspective comes from Prado and Trebilcock, who argue that aid agencies should prioritize working with self-identified agents of institutional reform, stakeholders within developing countries who are committed to transformation. These local reform advocates should develop self-defined agendas for institutional change, backed by broadly representative constituencies, ensuring that aid supports sustainable, locally driven governance improvements rather than external prescriptions. This approach suggests that effective aid should align with grassroots institutional reform efforts, reinforcing long-term development strategies rather than short-term relief measures. And there you have it, foreign aid, the global gift that sometimes gives, sometimes takes, and almost always sparks debate. From conditionalities that come with small print bigger than the check to the delicate dance of donor politics, one thing's clear: aid is never just about money. It's about power, reform, strategy, and occasionally awkward handshakes at summits. So, the next time someone says foreign aid is the answer, feel free to smile and ask, to which question exactly? Thanks for joining us on this whirlwind tour of global generosity, tied with a string or maybe a rope. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss our next episode, where we continue to unpack the intersection of law, economics, and the real world.